You know, the Irish have a saying, if you want to be praised, die. Well, that's a little radical. I'd say just go out and get yourself introduced by somebody like Patty, and by God, you'll feel very, very important indeed. I'm going to begin with a question here. I want you to think about this. I've been studying world religions all my life. What, of all the world religions, what religion developed the best defense of individual conscience up against the claims of a dominating authority? So of all the religions in the world, which religion developed the best defense of individual conscience against the claims of a dominating authority? The answer to that should be obvious. The Roman Catholic Church did it. In a thing called, that Patty illustrated there, a thing called probabilism. Probabilism is a remarkable achievement. You say, where have they been keeping it? And they've hidden it. They hid it in the attic, so you wouldn't do it. I teach it in every class I teach at Marquette, and in every class I begin by saying, 70% of them baptized Catholics. Have any of you heard of probabilism? Never. Never heard of it. Last year, one student said, I heard of it. And I said, oh, finally, it's getting out. How'd you hear of it? My roommate took your course. Okay, so very quickly, because they don't give us a lot of time here, I'm going to give you a quick little lesson on probabilism. And here's what it was all about. In history, what often happens, and certainly happened in the Catholic Church, you get a rigorous consensus on some moral issue, like contraception, like same-sex marriage, and everybody agrees on it. The popes are in on it, the bishops are in on it, the theologians all agree on it. And that was pretty much the case we have in those cases. Probabilism said, we'll call that like the big A on a chart. That's that rigorous consensus that is well established, okay? But then there appears on the edge of this a little b, a little itsy-bitsy b, which is the liberal dissenting view. And the question is, when does that liberal dissenting view which says, I think you're wrong, it is not always wrong, that thing you're talking about, that big A, there are times when it is perfectly right. So the question for probabilism was, when does little b get the credentials for you to go with it? And they said, as soon as it becomes, term of art, solidly probable, raising the good question, how does it do that? Then they said, there were two ways. This seemed a little tedious, but it's very well worth knowing. And if afterwards you want to get a summary of it, just write to Daniel Maguire, daniel.maguire@marquette.edu, and I'll send you a good summary of what probabilism is. Here's what to get solid probability, so that you're now free to follow that. Forget what the bishops think, forget what all the popes think, forget what all the other theologians think. You could have it in two ways. One they called intrinsic, which was basically do it yourself. I'll start with that. They said if you yourself come up with views that contradict what the bishops and the theologians and all of them are saying, you, little old you, comes up with a view, and your reasons are cogent, they use this language, but they kept saying, not necessarily overwhelming, not conclusive, and maybe you actually think those guys might be right, but you still have a doubt. And here was the cardinal principle of probabilism. Ubi dubium, ibi libertas. Sounds like something you could sing. Where there is doubt, there is freedom. And if you have reasons that are cogent, forceful, non-frivolous, would appeal to a truly reasonable person, they don't have to be overwhelming. And you could at the same time think, I may be dead wrong, but that doubt is solid. It's not frivolous. And what did probabilism say? Go with it. You're perfectly free. You can ignore what all those others have to say. That was intrinsic probabilism. The other one, the one that was more used, extrinsic. And that was on the basis of authority. And the authority they talked about was, if you have on a particular issue, if you could find 5 or 6 theologians, and by then at that time they always meant male ordained theologians, so women had no voice in the development of that either, but it's still liberal. If you could find 5 or 6 theologians who disagree with all the popes, bishops, and the other 10,000 Catholic theologians, and who are they? They're theologians known for their prudentia et doctrina. They're learned, and they're not wacky guys. They've been doing stuff that is one respect. They're solid scholars. If you can find 5 or 6 of those, you're absolutely free. You don't have to confess that. It's not a sin anymore, because you have a solidly probable opinion, which means it is not a sin. They even got more liberal. They said, if you can find one superstar that holds that minority dissenting liberal view, someone like Thomas Aquinas, or Alphonsus Liguori, or Anthony Padovano, or someone of that ilk, that's all you need. You're home free with that. What a doctrine. And let me read you, am I making this up? No, I have in hand here a book by Father Henry Davis going back to the 1930s. It's a 4-volume work in English, just to give you the character of the book. Old-time Catholicism book, okay? The entire book is in English until he comes to the chapter on sex, at which point, without apology or explanation, he goes into Latin. They said that's so that the housekeepers and the pastors wouldn't understand it. I think that was true. But now this is, so I got in hands a conservative old book. Now I just gave you a quick summary of probabilism. Here's what old Father Davis said. It is to be observed, probability is said to be intrinsic when the reasons for an opinion are cogent but not conclusive. They don't have to be overwhelming. It is called extrinsic when the authority, learning, and prudence of reliable people indicates that there is some serious doubt here. And notice these words. It is the merit of probabilism that there are no exceptions whatsoever to its application. Once given a really probable reason for the lawfulness of action in a particular case, although contrary reasons may be stronger, keep saying that, that's how liberal it is, there is no occasion in which I may not act in accordance with the good probable reason that I have found. I learned this stuff in Rome, along with Anthony. Didn't have any application of it until 1961. Young Father Maguire was in the office, and in comes a young man and gave me this story. He said a year before he met this young woman, was immediately smitten by her, considered just lovely, asked her out, discovered right away that she had gotten terrible messages about her body. Even a touch of her hand made her panic. A hug was out of the question. A kiss, unthinkable. Now that could turn off some guys back in 1961. Not anymore. Men now are more interested in the spiritual dimension of relationship. But back then men were animals, and it could easily have turned them off. But it didn't. He said, I was so fond of her. I said, well, don't worry about that. She was embarrassed that she felt that way. He said, listen, we both love skating. We love shows. We love hiking. I'd love to do stuff with you. And she said, okay, if you're willing to go along with that. So during a 6-month period, they, with no physical or erotic contact at all, they did lots of stuff together, and 2 souls began to unite. One night at a movie, 6 months out, and at a very tense moment in the movie, he instinctively reached for her hand, and she grabbed it, and she held it. And the healing had begun, and it continued. And by the time they came to see me, they were 6 months away from marriage, they had begun to do, I don't like to say having sex, they began to engage in sexual cherishing. I think that puts it the way it should be put. They were sexually cherishing one another, and she had even experienced orgasm. So from a woman who was totally alienated from her body, over those 6 months, from a wonderfully delicate, loving man, she was healed, absolutely healed. And he said to me, if we stop now this sexual cherishing and say, oh, we can't, have to hands off now for the next 6 months, he said, the ghost will come back. She'll be sick again with regard to her body. And I said, that's what you have to do. Young Dan Maguire, giving the old doctrine, said, yeah, you can. I mean, I gave all the arguments. You're breaking into the marital package. You can't do that. You have no right to be there. And then all of a sudden, bingo. I'm looking at an intrinsically, solidly probable opinion. His reasons were cogent, almost knocking me off my chair. Did they have to be conclusive? They didn't totally convince me. They didn't have to. but they sure established a doubt. And I said, okay, bring your fiancé in. And I gave my first lecture on probabilism. And I said, you are totally free to continue sexual cherishing. And don't bring it up to confession. That's a place for sins. Your sexual cherishing is holy. It's good. And probabilism tells you that. That's the beauty of probabilism. And I think it's used, I think, even by the Pope used it when the Argentinian woman called and said, I'm in a marriage not blessed by the church. I want to go to communion. I want to participate in the sacraments. Called the Pope. All of a sudden, one day, the phone rings in Argentina. The husband answers. Who's this? This is Father Bergoglio. I want to talk to your wife. And you've heard the story. He told her, forget that priest. Go to another parish. A lot of these priests think they're popes. You just go to communion. You have as much right to be at communion as anybody does. What was he practicing? Probabilism. He knew there are strong, more than 5 or 6 theologians, hundreds, thousands of theologians, Protestant, Jewish, Islamic, everything, who would say, no, these marriage can break up and then life can be discovered in another union. And he simply applied it. And the Vatican immediately had to apologize and say, the Pope's phone calls are not official teaching. They had to say that because he wouldn't let them off the hook by saying, oh, I misspoke, she misunderstood. No, he knew exactly. He's very sophisticated. And here I would say this in favor of Francis' final thought. I think maybe what he's saying, we get disappointed that he doesn't come out and change the doctrine. He doesn't have to come out and change the doctrine on contraception or anything else. We've already got in our pocket, right here in Father Davis's book and in the whole tradition, we've got the ability to say, Francis, you don't have to do it for us. We've already got, for years, the Vatican even used probabilism. People would say, what about this particular moral issue? And they'd write back, consulas auctoribus probatis, which means use probabilism. Don't bother us. Maybe Francis is saying, stop bothering the Vatican. You're grown up. Use your own minds.